was the springtime of our lives, our time of sandcastle memories. And seabirds racing on wings of flight. Time seemed forever in this bright season of life. Now the colors change into our sunset journey. A time to live, a time to die, a time to gather the echoes of our youth, to soar above the silver world, up into the holy silence, knowing that with God we have a time for every purpose under heaven.
In the late 90s, the California Catholic Conference began preparations to launch the Bishop's project, Embracing Our Dying. Embracing Our Dying is a statewide educational initiative hosted by each diocesan bishop and directed to clergy and parish leaders. It is intended to help them better understand, from the Catholic perspective, the issues involved with death and dying. Embracing Our Dying is an intensive day-long symposium in which a number of professionals review pertinent church teachings, present up-to-date medical and legal information, and offer practical resources to those attending.
Father Richard Benson is a Vicentian priest who has his PhD in biology and his doctorate in sacred theology. He currently serves as the Vice Rector, Academic Dean, and Professor of Moral Theology at St. John's in Camarillo. Father Benson?
Catholic bioethics is a consistent ethics that protects human life from the moment of conception to the moment of natural death. And it ties together the beginning of life and the end of life and our personal ethics and personal justice with the teachings of the Church about social justice. It is consistent. There is not a dichotomy between the Church's social justice teachings and her pro-life teachings from the beginning of life. I would suggest that the solution to a painful, lonely, and medically protracted death is not suicide or euthanasia, but acknowledging that medicine and medical facilities need to make peace with the reality and finality of death and be prepared to offer true care when cure is beyond us. These issues are reflected clearly in the Pope's 1980 document on euthanasia. And in that document, 2 points need to be emphasized. One is regarding pain, and the other is regarding ordinary, extraordinary means. Ordinary means are all medicines, treatments, and operations which offer a reasonable hope of benefit and which can be obtained and used without excessive expense, pain, or other inconvenience. For something to be ordinary, it has to meet 2 conditions. It has to have reasonable hope of benefit, and it has to not be burdensome. Just because a physician says this will be beneficial doesn't mean in and of itself that it is not extraordinary means. Extraordinary means are all medicines, treatments, and operations which cannot be obtained or used without excessive expense, pain, or other inconvenience, or which, if used, would not offer a reasonable hope of benefit. So for something to be extraordinary, it only has to meet 1 moral criteria, not 2. Ordinary means obligatory. It does not mean usual. Extraordinary means optional. It does not mean unusual. The Church's teaching resists euthanasia on one extreme and vitalism and physicalism on the other extreme, taking life before it's called or keeping life beyond and prolonging the dying process when one is being called home, that one is able to access whatever pain medication they need to deal with the pain from a medical point of view, and lastly, that extraordinary means are optional even when they offer a cure but remain burdensome.
Dr. Rex Green was a practicing oncologist for 23 years. He's currently on the staff of City of Hope. Dr. Green is not a Catholic, but he's on record saying that we Catholics are right on with our teaching on end of life. Dr. Green?
I cared for thousands of patients, lost count at 3,000 deaths, and none of them needed assisted suicide. What they needed was aggressive, caring, medical treatment that address their needs in the proper way. There are a number of problems in pain management, which is an essential element of end-of-life care. There are barriers to pain control that are regulatory. There are attitudes towards patients that they should, in essence, suffer in silence. There's a profound amount of professional ignorance as to how best to manage pain at the end of life. There is ignorance on both sides of the stethoscope as to what is the right approach to caring for patients who have pain. There's a law in California that says we have to record pain as the 5th vital sign, and there's a very simple conversation that's supposed to take place at the bedside. If you're my patient, I ask you to score your pain, 0 being none, 10 being as bad as it can be. Next question is, what do you want it to be? Morphine is safe and effective, and it can be prescribed by careful bedside monitoring at any dose level. The average patient with advanced cancer requires about 15 milligrams every 4 hours, but there are patients who have received thousands of milligrams an hour. And we're talking and conscious and breathing and so on. In the hospital setting, about a 5% successful pain control rate. In hospice, the patient is the focus of attention and the patient's family. In the hospital, the patient is treated somewhat like in boot camp. You will get up at a certain time and you will have treatments at a certain time. And patients learn to beg, they learn to suffer in silence. Hospice is pro-life. People don't go to hospice to die, they go there to live. In my personal experience caring for cancer patients, about a dozen patients made requests for assisted suicide in one form or the other, and all of them had rather simple family conflicts which resulted in transient episodes of depression, hopelessness, despair, which quite easily were resolved. The foremost thing that we can do when we go to the bedside is to touch the patient. Hold the patient's hand, touch them, make a human contact. The number 2 is to treat pain no matter what. This is not pain medication to facilitate death, but to make sure that the patient is comfortable at all times. Number 3 point is do not resuscitate. The worst thing that happens is the patient transiently survives and goes to the ICU with all kinds of tubes, most dehumanized environment of health care. The final point that I make is patients belong at home with their families, with their pets, with their familiar art objects, with their clergy.